Do you have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from EmploymentLawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
Hello there, and welcome again to Ask a Lawyer here on CP24. I'm John Scholes, your host, and joining us momentarily, John Pincus, employment lawyer from EmploymentLawyer.ca. On the show in just a bit today, the main topic will be top 5 employment issues you should be aware of as we move deeper and further into 2023. So stick around for that, important stuff. And to reach out to John and his team anytime. I'll give you the phone number first. Feel free to call them, have that chat, right? 1-888-861-4555. The email is ask@employmentlawyer.ca. Lots to get through in the show today. We'll get to some phone calls from our live radio show. I'll give you the details on how you can catch those shows every week. In fact, make a call, join the show, and you may appear on this show at a later date. But we always start off with the week that was. John, what's going on in your world, pal?
That's right. There's a lot going on in our world right now. A lot of people don't think about workplace rights because for most people, it's not something you have to think about every day, but it is something that's going to affect you or someone you know, typically at some point. And when it does happen, it is very important that you handle it with the right tools. We're seeing a lot of employment issues come up right now because of the mass layoffs, particularly in the technology sector. Naturally, companies want to save money. That's what they're there to do. They're going to use every tool at their disposal to try and save money, so employees should have all those tools at their disposal as well. Perfect example of this, very recently an individual came to us, a manager working for a small company, about 20 people. He's working there as a manager and everything's going well. And then recently, because of changes in the economy, because of changes with the company, they had to lay him off. So what do they tell him? They say, we're going to give you 8 weeks working notice. 8 weeks working notice, and that's it. That's the end of it, 8 weeks working notice. Now he said to them, hang on a second, I've been here 15 years. I should be getting more than 8 weeks of working notice, shouldn't I? Now the first response was, well, actually no, because we have a payroll of less than $2.5 million, so we do not need to give you more than 8 weeks notice. That's what the Employment Standards Act says. Now this person had actually watched the show. He was aware that at the end of the story is not the Employment Standards Act. The end of the story is your full common law rights for the most part. And for him, when he asked that question, the company said, well, no, that doesn't apply in your case because 8 years ago, which was 7 years into his employment, he signed an employment agreement. Right. He signed an employment agreement. And in that employment agreement, we have a clause that deals with this, that gives us the right to do this. So that's when he came to me. And long story short, he's not bound by that employment agreement. That employment agreement contained a clause which is not enforceable. And of course, it is always a red flag when someone has an employment agreement midway through their employment. That is a situation where you want to be calling a lawyer. And that's what they tried to do here. They tried to restrict his rights. Fortunately for him, they didn't do it properly. So he is going to be owed his full common law rights. And for him, that's as much as 16 months of his pay. So very important that he called us.
Good stuff. Again, I want to remind you, EmploymentLawyer.ca, the website. Anytime you'll have a drop-down menu for the media. Find a radio station across the country, as a matter of fact, where we've been doing our radio shows for the past decade, including News Talk 1010. That happens Sunday at 1 p.m. Call into the show, ask your questions. It may appear on this show. We like to play a few of those phone calls back during this half hour and talk about it a bit, right? We'll get to our first phone call from our radio show right now.
I got terminated 15 months ago. Gave me the standard 2 weeks for every year. So I got, my 5 years worth. That is, 10 weeks. But, and I rolled on that anyway. So it's quite an intimidating thing. So you have a tendency to cringe when it happens. Should it not have actually been based on my typical 60-hour week and not my 44-hour legal week?
Yeah, very good question. And this really speaks to the importance of understanding the difference between your minimum rights and your full rights. Now, very well may be the case that for the purpose of employment standards, you are owed only on the basis of 44 weeks, because employment standards is based on what we call regular wages, and regular wages excludes overtime. So for employment standards purposes, that may very well be legal. But for your full entitlements consider your historical income, what you would have earned had you continued to work. So the first issue here is No, it is not based on the 44-hour work week. For your full entitlements, it's based on the 60-hour work week. The other thing is, there was a discussion there about 2 week, my standard 2 weeks, my 5 years worth. Well, I think you're cutting yourself short there, right? You're not getting your 5 years worth necessarily if we're just looking at 2 weeks per year of service. It doesn't work like that. It isn't a formula. We consider your age, your position, and your length of service. And very likely in that case, the full entitlements are much more than 10 weeks, much more than 2 weeks per year of service. So again, the importance of minimum entitlements versus full entitlements. Full entitlements are much greater than what is in the Employment Standards Act and much greater than this notion that you get 2 weeks per year of service, which is not the case.
We'll take a short pause and we get back to the other side, the top 5 employment issues you should be looking out for as we roll into the rest of 2023. That is on the way. In the meantime, that number again, 1-888-861-4555. Email ask@employmentlawyer.ca. Lots more Ask a Lawyer is on the way right here on CP24. Stick around.
You have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from EmploymentLawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
All right, welcome back to Ask a Lawyer. Thank you so much for sticking on through the break. John Scholes here, and employment lawyer John Pincus is with us from EmploymentLawyer.ca. I want to move into the top 5 employment issues you should be looking forward and looking out for, at least for the remainder of 2023. Let's dive right into these, John. Number 1, layoffs and severance pay during a recession, right?
That's right. There's this notion that a lot of employers like to believe, well, if it's a recession, we don't have to pay as much, right? We don't have to pay as much because things are bad, so why is it fair that we should have to pay full severance packages to people when we are hurting? Well, the reality is that's not how it works. The employer is still required to pay your full severance even if times are bad, and the law is very clear on that. It's not an excuse to be a small company. It's not an excuse to be in poor financial times. It's not an excuse to be in poor economic times. You still owe that full severance. We still look at your age, your position, and your years of service. And in fact, it's also the case that if times are so bad economically, so we're talking about external to the company, where there's going to be a lot of people fishing from the same pond, a lot of people applying to the same positions, meaning that the availability of a similar job is going to be poor, then that person may actually have a greater severance entitlement. So it is actually the opposite of what is often assumed. And this is very important for employees and employers to know.
Issue number 2, looking ahead to 2023 for the rest of the year anyway, that is changes to your job due to a labor shortage or recession. How's that going to happen?
Right. So again, labor shortages, recessions do not give employers additional rights. They don't give them rights unless they are spelled out in writing in a contract. So that means that they do not have the right to change your hours, to change your pay, and to make other things that would not be contemplated in your original contract of employment. So if they do things like that, if they do things like lower your pay, if they do things like lower your hours, and in extreme circumstances, even an increase in work, that can constitute a constructive dismissal. But you want to be very careful when you're asserting a constructive dismissal because you do not want to do it on your own. If you do it on your own and you do it wrong, you could actually be resigning and giving up your severance. So very, very important that you do it with a lawyer. So not just that you do it the right way, but you do it at the right time. If you do it too early, it can be premature. If you do it too late, you may have accepted the changes. So as soon as the changes come into place, that's the time to contact an employment lawyer, walk you through a strategy to deal with it.
Employment law issues as we roll into the rest of 2023. Number 3 is this, rights when starting a new job, though. How about that?
Right. A lot of people think about their rights when their employment is over. Not so many people think about it when they are starting a new job. And especially in certain industries where there is a labor shortage, especially in a circumstance where you are being sought out by the company. That's where you have leverage, right? And a lot of people ask me, can I negotiate this? Is it possible to negotiate this? Well, you can negotiate almost anything when it comes to salary and when it comes to hours of work, when it comes to years of service and termination entitlements. It's really whatever they are prepared to agree to. So when you have that leverage, use it at the beginning. Don't just assume that they're going to treat you fairly. They may be very good people, but they have a duty to look out for their bottom line, so you got to have to look out for yours too. And when you are negotiating this contract, if you're being recruited, you shouldn't be agreeing to a probationary clause. You should maybe be negotiating so that your years of service from the other organization come into play, and you do it at the beginning, not at the end of the relationship.
Number 4 is misclassification of his employees as contractors. We've rung that bell a few times before. Huh?
Yeah, we see that a lot. I see that a lot in not only of people being misclassified throughout their employment, but sometimes people starting as an employee and then later being classified as a contractor just for the purposes of perhaps sending in invoices or for having an agreement that you're going to be at arm's length. Well, if you're not really at arm's length, then the law doesn't really care what you've written on an agreement. So if it's an independent contractor agreement, but in reality, you're still working for them, you're still subject to their control, you're still getting performance reviews. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it is a duck. It is an employee, and that means if you are let go, you are going to have the same rights as any employee who is let go. In fact, sometimes if you're a contractor, in certain circumstances, you may have rights that are equal to those that employees would have if you are let go. So very important to speak with an employment lawyer if that relationship ends.
We are talking about employment issues moving through 2023. Fifth and final one here, John. Again, we know this one very well. Accommodation of employees with disabilities.
Right. Well, sadly, anxiety and depression, very, very commonplace. We hear from people a lot who are struggling with these issues, and employers are trying to adapt. Some of them are trying to adapt in good faith, some of them not really recognizing the importance of these issues yet. Some of them just don't know how to handle it. And so if you're an employee or an employer, it's very important that you seek legal advice when the situation arises. But you should know if you are someone who is struggling with whether it's a physical ailment or a psychological ailment, you have rights. And it can be confusing because those rights aren't necessarily spelled out in the Employment Standards Act, right? In the Employment Standards Act, we talk about you get a few days sick pay, you get a few days sick leave, you get, parental leave. It doesn't really speak to what do you get if you are anxious, if you are depressed, and you've been diagnosed as such. Well, that we have to go to the Human Rights Code for. And the Human Rights Code gives employers the obligation to accommodate to the point of undue hardship. So that might mean giving someone time off, that might mean giving someone a modified position, that might mean having someone have a graduated return to work, but they have to do it unless they can show it was effectively impossible to do so. And if you're struggling with your employer who's not allowing you to do this, not allowing you to take time off or to be accommodated in your position or another position, that's the time to contact an employment lawyer.
Again, guys, as mentioned earlier in the first segment, EmploymentLawyer.ca, that is the website you want to go to. The Knowledge Center, drop-down menu, media. You'll find a radio show close to you that carries our weekly show. In this case, News Talk 1010, Sundays at 1 p.m. Let's get to our second phone call from our radio show and talk about it right now.
I was just wondering, if you have an employment contract that stipulates how much severance you get, should you get terminated, can you fight that? Is it better not to sign a contract when you first start a job?
Well, let's start with that second question, because that is a really great question and a really important one. And what we often say is, often the best employment contract you can have is one that's a handshake. Now, if it's an employment contract that you negotiated, like we were talking about earlier, you're being recruited and maybe you've negotiated a nice, golden parachute for yourself. If you're let go, maybe you've negotiated some terms that protect you, protect your bonus and protect you in the event that they let you go, then that can be a good contract. But most of the time, who's going to draft the contract? The employer. You're not going to have any role in that. It's going to be presented to you the same way that an iTunes agreement is presented to you, and you're just going to be said to sign at the bottom, right? And if you're doing that, you should think about what is going to be in there. Well, what's going to be in there are things that are there for the employer, things to benefit the employer. And so if you are starting a new job and you don't have any of those terms, then that doesn't mean you don't have any rights. You have the rights that are guaranteed to you under the common law. So that's a very good place to be in. Now, in the other question that this person had, can you fight it? If there's a stipulation in terms of what severance you can get, in the vast majority of cases, if your employer is relying on a termination clause that they say limits your rights, in fact, that termination clause is likely not valid. It's possible it is, but that would certainly be in the minority. So before assuming that just because your employer says something, it's true, you want to have that reviewed by an employment lawyer. We'll be able to look over it in a few minutes. We'll be able to tell you if that employment contract and that termination provision is enforceable. And if it's not, as we've seen, the difference between minimum and full entitlements is huge. So you need to know the answer to that question.
Love the phone calls. Want to take another one, but we got to wait till the other side of the break. In the meantime, that phone number to reach out to John and his team, simple, 1-888-861-4555. Email is ask@employmentlawyer.ca. And we continue with more Ask a Lawyer right here on CP24. Hang on.
You have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from EmploymentLawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
And welcome back to Ask a Lawyer. And we like our phone calls. We take them all the time across the country on the radio shows. That's how we do it for the past 10 years, including News Talk 1010, Sundays at 1 p.m. Feel free to join us this coming weekend. Call us, make that phone call, and might appear on this show a little later on. It's our third phone call for this show. John, let's get to it right now.
Last week, I was let go from my employment after 25 years for just cause, and legally, I'm just asking you what I'm entitled to. It said in the letter, for just cause, misconduct, willful misconduct.
Well, the big question here is, what did you do, right? What were you accused of doing, and did you do it? And just because you did what you were accused of doing, by the way, does not mean that's just cause. Most of the time, when someone comes to us who's been let go for just cause, there's no dispute that the person did it. The question is, does the punishment fit the crime, right? We call just cause the capital punishment of employment law. So does the punishment fit the crime? Well, if you stole from the employer, if you've committed fraud, that very well could be just cause for dismissal. In fact, probably will be just cause for dismissal in most cases. But did you make a mistake? Did you get in arguments with your coworkers, with your boss? That's probably not going to be just cause. And especially after 25 years, it's almost certainly not going to be just cause. So let's go to the pocket employment lawyer and look what this person is entitled to in the event they've been wrongfully dismissed. We see they were 62 after 25 years, 24 months, $110,000 based on their annual income. $110,000 that they are relinquishing after they wait 2 years, because that's the limitation period, if they take what their employer says at face value. So it's so important, especially if your employment has been terminated for just cause, that you speak to an employment lawyer.
Access to that severance calculator you just saw, simple, pocketemploymentlawyer.ca. You just click on it. It's free. It's anonymous. You can use that anytime. Again, pocketemploymentlawyer.ca for the severance calculator. I want to get to a question, John, you got recently through email. That is ask@employmentlawyer.ca, right? It says, I worked at a small business for 4 years on one-year contracts. Right before the end of the last contract, I was suddenly told it would not be renewed, and I was thanked for my service. It was a punch to the gut. Can they do that so abruptly?
No, in situations like this, we have to think about what is a fixed-term contract there for? Well, it's there to give the parties certainty. It's there to give you certainty if you're the employee on that fixed-term contract. Well, if you're on a fixed-term contract and it's renewed, and it's renewed, and it's renewed again, and renewal is contemplated, and you're constantly getting it renewed, it's not really fixed anymore. And the law recognizes that when it becomes an indefinite relationship, you can't just slap on the same fixed-term contract every time and treat that as indefinite employment. So that's a situation where actually you're going to be entitled to severance most of the time, and that's when you want to speak to an employment lawyer, because it's going to be the same severance everyone else is entitled to.
One more short little break. We'll get to another question or two with our remaining time. In the meantime, here's that number once again. I always give it to you to reach John and his team, 1-888-861-4555, or an email, send one along, might appear on air a little later on the show or following shows, ask@employmentlawyer.ca. We'll continue with more Ask a Lawyer. Hang on.
You have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from EmploymentLawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
Welcome back to Ask a Lawyer. I want to remind you, you can reach out to John Pincus, employment lawyer at EmploymentLawyer.ca anytime. Phone number 1-888-861-4555. Ask at EmploymentLawyer.ca. That would be the email address. Okay, we'll get to one more final question here. I know, John, you do a ton of live streaming on Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn. You're a busy guy. You want to take part, you can do so. stlawyers.ca. stlawyers.ca. Anytime to join in. It says, I made an honest mistake on the job which cost the company a new client. Instead of firing me, my employer let me resign in order to keep my record clean. What was the best option?
Do not resign.
Right.
Do not resign. Your employer is not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they know if they let you go, they're going to owe you severance. One honest mistake, especially if you've been working there for a long time, you are going to be owed severance. But if you resign and you do it voluntarily and you can't prove that you were forced into it, which can sometimes be a tricky thing to prove, then you are not going to be owed any severance. So keep working. If they let you go, you're going to be owed severance. If they do things to change your job to try to make your life miserable, then you very well also could be owed severance. That's where you'll speak to an employment lawyer, but do not quit. If you're in a situation like that and you're feeling uncomfortable, you don't know what to do, there are people there who can help you. There are employment lawyers who can help guide you through it. That's when to speak with an employment lawyer.
Because it's going to come down to the, I'll expect your resignation, or you're better off if you resign, it'll do this. Never do that. Just what do you do in that situation? Say, no thanks, I'm good?
You say, I have no intention of resigning.
Right.
I'm very sorry about that mistake, but I'm not going to be resigning. I will improve. I will try my best not to make it happen again, not to let it happen again, but I'm not quitting because I have no interest in quitting. That was your idea, not mine, and I'm not interested in doing that.
And the key part's severance. You want your severance at the end, yeah?
You want to get your severance, and you are going to give that up if you quit. So if they want to end the relationship, let them end the relationship, not you.
And again, if you're ever wondering what that severance would be in that similar situation, told you about it before, pocketemploymentlawyer.ca. It's free, it's anonymous, you can use that any time. The severance calculator is built into it. Over 2 million of us, 2 million have used that severance calculator to find that magic math, that number at the end. So you want to use that anytime. We are just about done for the show. Thank you so much. Anytime you want to reach out, more further contact, cp24.com/askalawyer. And to reach John and his team anytime, that phone number, one more time, 1-888-861-4555. Email is ask@employmentlawyer.ca. And again, pocketemploymentlawyer.ca. Very important website. Use that at your leisure anytime. And we'll talk to you next time right here on Ask a Lawyer.